Please welcome Ambassador Cindy McCain.
Welcome, everyone, and it's so nice to see so many of you here to join us on this wonderful weekend that I hope you gain from and you enjoy as well. It's my job right now to introduce someone that I just recently met today. But during the course of our conversation, I found a very warm, a very charming, a very understanding, and also someone that's extremely sharp. And that's our Secretary Yellen. What an honor for me to be able to introduce someone with such stature and such independence. And as you know, most women who are in these kinds of jobs are very independent. And so I'm very honored to be here, to be able to introduce to her. And I'm reminded of what we all know, and certainly what John McCain stood for, and that is strong democracies need strong economies. And without that, we don't have what we need to not only keep countries free and democratic, but have a strong economy so that they can feed their children, educate their children, and build safe and strong communities. So I'm very honored and very proud to be able to introduce to you Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and good afternoon, everyone. My thanks to the McCain Institute for the invitation to speak at this year's Sedona Forum. This event brings people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives together around common values, which I know matter deeply to John McCain. Senator McCain was an American hero from his service in the Navy to the Senate. Yet, perhaps his most important legacy is his belief in the unifying power of American democracy. He said of our country, "We are 325 million opinionated, vociferous individuals. We argue and compete, and sometimes even vilify each other in raucous public debates. But we have always had so much more in common with each other than in disagreement." Today I will talk about how John McCain was right. It's impossible to overestimate how important democracy is to America. It's the founding idea of our country. From the Revolution itself to the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, it's how we define ourselves. Amidst those who question democratic values, we must reaffirm basic democratic principles, our commitment to the values embodied in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. For Americans, democracy is not only the basis for our self-conception, it's also the basis for our success. Americans work hard to support themselves and their families, but beyond that, most care about serving their fellow Americans. If there were ever an American who exemplified this commitment, it was John McCain. McCain refused a special offer to be freed as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He did so because he would not accept treatment that was preferential to that of his American prison mates. It is Americans' respect for their fellow citizens' views and needs that truly underlies America's success. That is what allows us to work out our disagreements and to address legitimate concerns. And it explains why America is commonly viewed as one of the hardest working and most successful countries in the world. We care not just about ourselves, but about one another. As expressed by a worker quoted in Michel Lamont's The Dignity of Working Men, "If I become rich, I'm going to carry the same mind I got now. I'm going to be caring. And the people that don't have it, I would never turn my back on them, never. People's hearts should come first. Don't put money before people or use people to get money. These are the feelings of American patriots. We do our jobs to support ourselves and our families, but we also do them to fulfill the duty that we feel to the fellow members of our democracy. We must protect this democratic spirit as we must work to protect other pillars of democracy, from political accountability to economic freedom to strong institutions that uphold the rule of law. I admit this doesn't seem like typical terrain for a Treasury Secretary. But democracy isn't just important in and of itself. I believe that democracy is critical to building and sustaining a strong economy. Indeed, the argument made by authoritarians and their defenders that chipping away at democracy is a fair or even necessary trade for economic gains is deeply flawed. Undercutting democracy undercuts a foundation of sustainable and inclusive growth. Recently, democracy has come under threat. That challenge was especially terrifying on the notorious day of January 6th, when rioters, spurred on by a lie, stormed the Capitol. They attempted to block the peaceful transition of leadership at the heart of our democracy. But the threat to democracy is not just here at home. In Europe, Putin's authoritarian regime continues to wage a brutal and unjust war. That war is devastating to Ukraine's future, and it's also undermining the rules-based international order. Around the world, we see examples of increasing repression. Freedom House's annual report found that political rights and civil liberties decreased in 52 countries in 2023. There are improvements in only 21. In the face of such threats, we must reaffirm our conviction in the importance of democracy based on mutual respect. Our democracy is far from perfect, but that respect has always been the basis for Americans' ability to cooperate with each other, even in difficult circumstances. We must renew our commitment to do everything possible to protect it, for democracy itself and for the economy. Economists have long studied the importance of democracy to economic growth. One recent study analyzing 175 countries over a 50-year period found that democratization increases GDP per capita by around 20% in the long run. But today, I'd like to focus not on the top-line numbers, but on three of the most important pillars of democracy that I've seen throughout my life: accountability, economic freedom, and strong and independent institutions that uphold the rule of law. At its core, democracy is about accountability. In a democracy, free and fair elections give citizens the opportunity to re-elect or remove their leaders at regular intervals, affirming the country's direction or calling for change. And Senator McCain understood the importance of the peaceful transfer of power well. In his 2008 concession speech, he urged his supporters to congratulate the president-elect and to work together to get our country moving. Robust democracies also provide for accountability between elections. Citizens can voice their concerns by means that range from public comments to protests. The free press uncovers corruption and wrongdoing. Checks and balances limit the power of each part of government, and the list goes on. Such accountability has far-ranging impacts. First and foremost, it drives economic policy making that meets people's needs. Democracies tend to invest more in public goods, like health and education, as much as 20 to 30% more for health care, according to one study. And these investments matter for individuals' economic outcomes. An additional year of schooling increases earnings by 7 to 10% on average. And this is intuitive to many of us. My father was a doctor, and as a child, I heard stories from him about how good health enabled his patients to lead productive lives. And I credit my own strong public high school education with opening the door to higher education and to work I found meaningful. Second, if democracy is working as it should, government is accountable to all citizens, regardless of income, ethnicity, gender, and geography. This broad accountability leads governments to take into account diverse perspectives. This includes caring for those who have been left out. Third, accountability matters because it is not a one-time mechanism. Looming future elections and opportunities for voice between elections means citizens can demand different economic policymaking if their needs are not being met. And in response, government can correct its course over time. Accountability is only one of the pillars of democracy. Freedom to participate in the economy and the free flow of people and ideas also fuel growth and dynamism. The foundation of an economy's productive capacity is its labor force, and yet too often the labor force is restricted by constraints on the political and economic rights of certain groups. America's come a long way here, driven in large part by citizens demanding change. I was a freshman in college in 1963 when the March on Washington occurred. Around the same time, I began to fully understand the discrimination faced by women in professions like economics. I was one of the very few women in my graduate economics program, and there were no tenured women on the faculty when I started teaching. The barriers to participation in the economy for Black Americans, women, and many others was first and foremost a moral affront. But it was also an economic one. One of the most important economic stories of my lifetime was millions of Americans gaining greater access to our country's economic life. Specifically, the share of 25 to 54-year-old or prime-age women participating in our labor force more than doubled, from 35% just after World War II to 74% in 1990. The inclusion of women in our workforce contributed about half a percentage point per year to the potential growth rate of real GDP over that period. Alongside broad participation, economies benefit from the free flow of people and ideas. During my years in the Bay Area, I saw the payoffs from risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and innovation. From the invention of the microprocessor 5 decades ago to the growth of Apple and Google, and more recently. A recent study of 23 OECD countries from 1972 to 2010 has affirmed the connection between democracy and entrepreneurship, particularly through social exchange and the diffusion of knowledge. And the free flow of people and ideas doesn't just benefit innovators. The ability to form unions builds worker power. According to a recent Treasury report, unions raise the wages of their members by 10 to 15% and bring non-wage benefits such as more predictable scheduling. As Treasury Secretary, I benefit from engaging with public, private, and nonprofit stakeholders who are unafraid to speak openly, and a free press that amplifies diverse perspectives. Democratic governments rely on this freedom of speech and freedom of the press to make wise decisions that benefit every member of our democracy. And this leads me to the third pillar. Alongside accountability and economic freedom, Democracy is associated with strong, independent institutions that uphold the rule of law. In a democracy, individuals and firms can trust that arrangements such as property rights will not change overnight and will be enforced fairly, no matter who is in power. Winners are not predetermined or subject to arbitrary and unpredictable whims of political leaders. Citizens in a democracy also widely obey the law, and they do so because other citizens also support it, and they view it as their duty to cooperate with law enforcement. If I disobey the law, you will see it as your duty to help the authorities as the law requires, and vice versa. Such cooperation is a foundation of democracy. There's a name for the respect for the law that's typical of democracies. It's called legitimacy. Absent such legitimacy, democracy collapses, but with it, democracy thrives. As the president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve, I saw how capital markets, grounded in the rule of law, help drive the dynamism of Silicon Valley. And every day, the rule of law supports thousands of other economic decisions, from purchasing a home because you know your deed will be upheld in court, to expanding your business because you will be competing based on your ingenuity and hard work and not on the biggest bribe to your local officials. I've also seen that the rule of law can be bolstered by institutions that are insulated from political interference. As chair of the Federal Reserve, I insisted on the Fed's independence and transparency because I believe it matters for financial stability and economic growth. And recent research has been consistent with my belief. It has shown that greater central bank independence is associated with greater price stability, which contributes significantly to long-term growth. My belief in the impact of democracy on the economy is also influenced by observing what happens in its absence. Again, I'll take an example from my own experience. Just prior to the integration of East and West Germany in 1991, I studied the economy of East Germany. It had been believed strongly in the United States and elsewhere that the East German economy was doing well under its communist government. On the contrary, our data showed that outside of the energy sector, there was only one single enterprise in East Germany that would be able to make a profit after unification when its currency, the East Mark, was exchanged for Deutschmarks on a one-for-one basis. That one firm was Meissen. The East Germans had not only suffered greatly from the cruelty of their totalitarian regime with its ever-vigilant Stasi, they had also done much less well economically than their West German counterparts on the other side of the border. Nor is Russia, which was for so long the center of the Soviet Empire, a poster child for the economic success of those who disparage democracy. Recent IMF estimates of GDP per capita of Russia relative to the United States are about 1/6. Repression has driven highly educated workers from the country, taking their skills, ideas, and capital with them. For example, to launch some of the world's leading startups, not from Russia, but from the United States and other jurisdictions. Any efficiencies that come from a totalitarian state seem to be far more than offset by the advantages of democracy. As for China, there's no denying that China's catch-up growth lifted hundreds of millions of people from poverty. This is one of the great global economic achievements of the past century, and it's a result of its market liberalization and opening up. But China's future growth is far from certain. Its GDP per capita is currently 1/6 of America's and less than 1/3 that of the European Union. And I believe that the absence of some of the pillars I've described will continue to pose challenges as China navigates the transition to an advanced economy. Limits on transparency and censorship give companies reason to doubt the information they receive, and coercive actions against firms undermine fair competition. And the nearby Korean peninsula offers another striking example. In the 70 years of evolving democracy in South Korea and dictatorship in North Korea, the country's economic trajectories have also diverged sharply. Today, per capita income in South Korea is estimated to be 30 times greater than in North Korea, and life expectancy in the South is a decade longer. So what does this add up to? Democracy is not just intrinsically good. Promoting democracy is also good economic policy. It creates the conditions for workers to thrive and for businesses to invest and grow, among the many potential gains I've highlighted. The argument that eroding democracy would be a fair or necessary trade for economic gains is wrong. And yet, this argument has taken root abroad and even here in America. I believe that's because economic success, even in a robust democracy, is not 100% guaranteed. Democracies and economies take hard work to build and maintain, and it's easy to lose faith. I turn to that now. I've spoken before about the challenges faced by America's working families. Over decades, communities across the country have been hollowed out from deindustrialization. Median real wages have stagnated. Healthcare and education have become harder to afford. Many American working families are uncertain about their future, and there has been a significant increase in deaths of despair. This insecurity and fear persists today, not only in America, but for people elsewhere around the world. And this has led many people to understandably question whether democracy can, in fact, deliver for themselves, their families, their communities, and their countries. Over the past 3 years, President Biden and I have worked to show here at home that it can, despite dysfunction in Washington and the face of challenges still ahead. As the president said last September, in honor of Senator McCain's legacy, I've made the defense and protection and preservation of American democracy the central issue of my presidency. We've shown democracy can deliver by addressing immediate crises and kitchen table issues that matter to Americans, and through the pursuit of a medium and long-term economic agenda focused on economic opportunity for all. We took office in the depths of the recession brought on by the pandemic. President Biden went big at this time of national emergency. We provided cash relief for households, prevented tenants from being evicted, and supported small businesses to keep employees on their payrolls. Our vaccination campaign saved lives, enabled return to work. The funding we provided was unprecedented, not just in its scale, but in its flexibility. It was designed to reach every city and town in the United States, big or small, urban or rural, and to empower them to meet their citizens' needs. And America bounced back quickly, achieving rapid economic growth and unemployment that remains near historic lows. We avoided the scarring that affected a generation of workers after the global financial crisis. The recovery has been historically fast and historically inclusive. We've seen the lowest unemployment rate since the 1960s and a narrowing of the black-white wage gap. There was a nearly 20% gap between the metropolitan and rural rates of unemployment. That gap has now been eliminated. Now, we're designing and implementing choices for the president's Investing in America agenda. Its aim? That gains will be felt broadly and no community or worker will be left behind. The results so far are promising. Treasury analysis has shown that states with lower median household incomes are receiving more funding per capita from the president's historic infrastructure law than wealthier states. That means new bridges, roads, and airports, fast broadband, and clean water, and the economic opportunities that come with upgraded infrastructure are being expanded in the communities that need it most. The same is true for our investments in the industries of the future. We're creating good jobs and pathways to them for American families across the country. 84% of clean energy investments announced since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed have been in counties with college graduation rates below the national average. 75% have been in counties with median incomes below the national average. And I've seen the impact myself in trips around the country, from a plant making parts for EV batteries in rural Kentucky to a workforce training center in downtown Milwaukee. As I do this work, I feel the ways in which democracy is influencing me and other public servants to serve all Americans, strengthening my policymaking with diverse inputs and making capital markets transparent. Put simply, democracy is delivering for Americans and for our economy. With democracy, it's the America of all of us. All of us must make our contributions and listen to one another. That's what democracy is all about. And even when we disagree, we must respect each other. Well, let me end with this. Churchill once quipped that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And he's right. We need to acknowledge democracy is not perfect, and it's messy. We have made and will continue to make mistakes. Also, in a democracy, everyone does not get their way, and we're bound to see some dissatisfaction and frustration from those who feel strongly about their opinions. Yet, it's essential that we do not give in to the impulses of some and make the devastating error of turning away from our democratic spirit and system. Ultimately, democracy provides the accountability, freedoms, and rule of law that give us the best chance of learning from our mistakes and doing better. With democracy, no one man or woman dictates how we solve our problems. We work through them together. As we look ahead, we need to make it easier for Americans to afford childcare, access education, live in quality housing, and retire with dignity. We need to do more than reaffirm our conviction in democracy. We must recommit to its protection, and we must also show that it can deliver. We live in a time of significant challenges. A once-in-a-century pandemic took millions of lives and livelihoods. Conflict in the Middle East has led to humanitarian crisis. The physical and economic costs of climate change are a daily reminder of its existential threat. It's a moment that demands American leadership, including by bolstering our democracy and supporting democracies around the world. John McCain once said that being American meant more to him than any other association. I too feel immensely fortunate to have been born and live here, as my life has been made possible by the promise of American democracy. America gave me the opportunity to acquire an excellent education. In my own career, democracy has made me free to examine and question economic orthodoxy. Being a woman in economics wasn't always easy, but I stood on the shoulders of women who had fought for their democratic rights and paved the way for me and other women economists to reach the heights of our profession. And now I feel a special obligation to strengthen the institutions that I've benefited from my whole life. I realize that there are many across this country and around the world who have not had my opportunities. That might give us reason to doubt the power of democracy. But on the contrary, it should be the reason for us to redouble our work, to bolster democracy for its own sake, and also for America's and the world's economic future. So America can be the land of opportunity for everybody. For my own part, I promise to do everything I can to make this happen. A strong democracy is critical to building and sustaining a strong economy, and also it is the job of all of us to do everything possible to protect it. Our commitment to it has been central to who we are since July 4th, 1776. Thank you.
Please welcome back Dr. Michael Crow.
Madam Secretary, it's great to have you here in a beautiful place, and I know you've been traveling across the entire planet trying to find ways to advance the interests and success of the United States, but I want to go back in time a little bit. You mentioned 1963, you went to college, I think you went to Brown, and then later picked up a rapid PhD at Yale. You were done start to finish in 8 years, which is shocking. And so what I'd like to get at is 1963 to 1971 has to be one of the most complicated periods in American history. The war, the senator in the war, fighting in the war, the things that went on in the country in 1968, the things that followed that, the reshaping, the things that were happening. What was driving you to go into economics? What was driving you to take on this very, very complex form of political mathematics and economic modeling and so forth? What was driving you way back then?
Well, I always felt that economics concerned something that was utterly vital to the welfare of every American and every citizen around the world. And I learned from the economics I studied that there really was no better system than free market capitalist system, but that there are problems and ways in which markets can misfunction or may fail to deal with problems that are critical to welfare, whether it's climate change or the need for public education, or health care, or regulation of financial institutions. So I felt from the onset that good public policy plays a critical role in ensuring an economic system that works well for everyone. And I was fascinated by what I learned about what might be possible, and it's what really motivated me to study economics at that time.
Well, I went back and did a quick survey of the 70 or so people that have been the Treasury Secretary for the United States, and you're going to laugh when I say this, but the person intellectually closest to you, in my view, was Hamilton. And what I mean by that now, so Hamilton didn't have the opportunity to finish college. The Revolution came along. He went off to be a soldier, but he later, as you knew, penned the whole concept of the central bank and the whole concept of many of the aspects of our economy. And then you have been in San Francisco and then chair of the Fed and now Treasury Secretary, and you've been writing for all these decades about all these complex subjects. At founding, and this goes to the root of the questions about democracy, we really decided in the design of the United States that this democracy would be capitalists. This democracy would further personal development, including wealth development and wealth enhancement, that we would protect and defend intellectual property as it is in the Constitution itself. I mean, all these things were laid out as a design. As you implement that design now, 200 plus years later, in a world that no one then could have imagined, I mean, particularly on the aspects of, as you were saying in your speech, democracy and our success economically, democracy and our success socially, what are some of those design elements that you think are most important?
Well, as I mentioned in the speech, accountability, the ability of a population to weigh in periodically on how things are going and whether policy needs to move in a different direction. I think that's critical.
So in economic theory then, so there are economists that don't agree with that. They're not in democratic societies, they're in other societies. And so what's the essential nature of that weighing in process, the way the political process works, which seems inefficient to outsiders who are not benefiting from our democracy? Just help the audience to understand how that's important to economic success.
Listening to an informed debate about what is the right path and understanding different viewpoints, allowing people to weigh in, is critical to actually understanding what the issues are that we need to deal with and figuring out what the best way is to dealing with them. At Treasury, we have an important role in writing many of the rules that affect how programs are run. We're in the middle at the moment of formulating almost all of the rules pertaining to clean energy now. And our laws prescribe a process, the Administrative Procedure Act, that guarantees we listen to every voice that wants to weigh in. Every affected party, every interested party. Sometimes we can get 40,000 comments on a notice of proposed rulemaking that we put out, and we need to respond to those comments. And sometimes people point out things that were flaws in what we had originally done, and we have to respond to that. And I think that ability for people to weigh in, for policymakers to be forced to explain carefully what they're doing and why, and answering critics is fundamental to driving good policy decisions. So the lively debate is critical to good outcomes.
Yeah, which is the
Sometimes
opposite.
it slows things down, sometimes it takes
Which is
a
the
long
opposite.
time to get something done in a democracy, but it's essential to economic success over long periods.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Russia and their 1/6 of the per capita income on the United States. And if you look at their economic performance over time, it's been a disaster. I was in Russia the summer of 1991, sent there by the American government to help figure out ways that we could help stimulate the economy as they seem to be moving in a path of democracy, which has subsequently collapsed and moved into an even tighter dictatorship, which strangely some American politicians seem to be enamored with. And so you said it, but let me put a little edge on it. So our democracy is loud and boisterous and argumentative, and we have these laboratories of democracy called the states. And so 2 states over is a place called Texas. So in Texas, man, it's like day and night arguing, every kind of strange idea that you can possibly imagine popping up, and yet their economy is larger than the Russian economy. So the Texas economy is now larger than the economy of the Russian Federation. So when you travel around the world and you're talking about democracy, like in the United States, where we argue and we debate and we take time to deliberate and we put people in office and we throw people out of office and we do all kinds of things along the way, how do you help project the success of the model? Because people don't seem to want to actually look at the facts. The economy of Texas is larger than the economy of Russia. Oh, and by the way, with about a quarter as many people.
Well, I guess as I travel around the world, I would say that most people are very impressed with the success of the United States. I think early on in China, one often heard the argument that Americans can't get anything done. I mentioned some of these. We have had some deep-seated structural problems
Right.
that have really adversely affected many people in our country, led to dissatisfaction, the disappearance of good jobs in many parts of the country, the difficulty of getting a college education,
Right.
the disappearance of jobs for people without a college education.
Aspirations not being realized.
And that's led to a lot of dissatisfaction, and it's a part of, I think, what has led Americans, but also for the Chinese to make the case that, look, our system, we decide on something and it goes into effect immediately. You know, we have a dictatorship, and the president of China decides what he wants to do, and it begins being implemented the next day. We don't have that in the United States, but most people do recognize the United States as a very strong economy. And I think as we've gotten beyond the pandemic, if you compare how the United States is doing with every other developed economy, the United States has had stronger economic performance. And
Well, isn't it so strange? You know, I was mentioning when we talked briefly before, David Brooks did a great job of sort of summarizing the world since 1990. And in the world since 1990, the United States has outperformed everyone in everything, literally everyone in everything. Yet we seem to have difficulty understanding that. And I think, what do you think is at the root of the difficulty of, other than I think, what you were describing as disillusion, you know, in the job I have at the university the last 22 years as president, what I see is disappointment. You said we would have these opportunities and then they're not here. You said we might have a chance to do this and it's too difficult to get there. So what do you think is at the root of not understanding the relative success of the United States?
so I think recently the pandemic has been a profound experience for most American families that live through it, and profoundly disturbing to our way of life. And it was a period in which there were a couple of years with very high inflation. And right now, people are very concerned about the cost of living. Now, in fact, wages have gone up as much as prices, more than prices have gone up, but it has been profoundly disturbing to
Right.
people to see things, whether it's a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk.
Just what they
that
cost, yeah.
buy so much higher than they were, and they wonder if they're going to be able to keep up. And on top of that, of course, we have challenges that many Americans have faced for a long time. A healthcare system where health insurance has not always been available, and when it is, has been expensive, difficult to afford a college education, childcare, expensive to obtain, and the cost of housing, a tremendous burden on many households. So these are areas where we need to do work. President Biden's top priority is trying to address the high cost of living that has been for a long time. This is not, much of this is not new. It's longstanding problems that we haven't dealt with.
Yeah, you probably didn't hear when I was speaking earlier, I was mentioning that we won one of the carbon hubs in the Infrastructure Act.
Hydrogen,
Yeah. Well, no, we won one of the carbon capture hubs.
Oh, I see.
And then we won one of the hubs for the microelectronics commons in the Chips and Science Act. And then we won one of the engines projects in the new NSF efforts to create whole new economies with new areas of rapidly evolving technology, and those are all things that have just recently been funded. And so for us, I mean, things are on fire in just every possible way. And so here we have all of these initiatives, all of this spending, an economy which is making progress, things that are making progress. And so as we try to explain both to ourselves and to others, you know, the role of democracy, the central role of democracy, as you were saying in your speech, you know, what are the lessons that you try to say to our allies, stay the course, or newly emerging democracies like Hungary that's trying to figure out what the word democracy means? You know, what do you, you know, as they're coming along and, you know, evolving and so forth, how do you help them to understand the importance and the centrality of democracy?
Well, I mean, there are threats to democracy in many parts of the world, including in some of our closest allies. But I think people appreciate what the strengths of a democracy are. That just the certainty of rule of law that you can count on creates an environment for business that is essential. It's something you don't think about every day, but a person who wants to build a business, to invest in it, really has to be able to count on predictability and enforcement of the rule of law to feel there may not be just throwing away their life savings. When you look at the strength of our universities and of innovation in America,
It's unbelievable.
it's amazing, and people see that, and they're impressed by that. I mean, that we are a dynamic economy. We have vibrant, innovative, entrepreneurial activity.
Yes.
And that it's
accelerating. All of that is accelerating even so.
well, and we're investing again. I mean, President Biden has worked with Congress to increase the amount of funding for basic research and development.
We feel that dramatically.
Which is really critical. It had declined substantially over time, but when you think about what promotes higher living standards,
Right.
a lot of it comes from R&D, basic R&D, that then spills over into all sorts of innovations that make our economy stronger and more productive.
They're flashing the red light, but I have to ask you, and I was just in China recently, and you were in China, and we have you know, many American interests in China, thousands and thousands of companies, and all these complexities and everything that's going on, and this is where I was attributing to you sort of design level thinking. So you're over there negotiating, if you will, you know, how we're going to work together. They purchase large amounts of our debt. They have all kinds of intricate connections into the American economy, and we have intricate connections into their economy. What was your general sense? I mean, I don't think they're becoming a democracy next month, but...
No, I don't think they are. So I didn't think I was going to be successful in convincing them to make that change.
Yes.
But all that said, I believe we're going to have a more peaceful and stable world if the two largest economies in the globe can manage to get along and live successfully together. And we have vital national interests, national security interests. We sometimes have to restrict the export of technology or other things, or protest human rights violations. This is really our vital national interest. But there is a broad swath of trade and investment activity between our countries that is beneficial to us, beneficial to the Chinese, and I think we need to allow space, make sure that in addressing our vital national concerns, we don't needlessly destroy something that is very beneficial. So my objective has been to be straightforward about the concerns that America has about China in the economic realm, to seek to get China to address ways in which the playing field for firms is not level, and to try to address that, and to make clear that we will address our national security concerns, but look for peaceful dialogue to get along as best we can.
I used the short form when I was over there talking to them with some of the same arguments. I said, all I'm looking for is full contact hockey between us and them, where you can actually be put into the penalty box for cheating. And they seemed to understand that, but they didn't know what I meant by hockey. Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. It's been wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.